أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. We thank and praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for all the blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. We send our peace and blessings on our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Okay, we'll move straight into our topic tonight, the leadership of our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And today we are going to specifically look at Caravan Leader, the Caravan Leader, as outlined in the 3rd chapter of the book by John Adair on the leadership of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So he starts out by quoting this hadith, and I've included the Arabic. إِذَا خَرَجَ ثَلَاثَةٌ فِي سَفَرٍ فَلْيُؤَمِّرُوا أَحَدُهُمْ. When 3 people set out on a journey, they should appoint one of them as their leader. So this is a statement from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It is a hadith collected in the hadith book of Abu Dawood rahmatullah alayhi. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam talking about a journey leader. So this concept of a journey leader, that and what is significant about this hadith, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned the number of 3. So that even if you are 3 on a journey, appoint one of the 3, one of you, to be the leader of that particular journey. And then looking at Mecca, obviously the city into which the Prophet ﷺ was born, but looking before the coming of the Prophet ﷺ, what was Mecca renowned or significant for? Was the pilgrimage, the Hajj, which started way back with Nabi Ibrahim ﷺ and his offspring. They built the Kaaba, rebuilt the Kaaba on its foundation. Zamzam was discovered by Hajar alayhi salam, and the black stone, a meteorite which is from outer space, was then used as part and formed part of this significant structure. And then he talks about the Semitic languages. Mecca, in the Semitic languages, Mecca Rabba, meaning temple, according to Ptolemy. And also Mecca was an important trade center. So you had this trade center in Mecca, you had trade to the north, Syria, and trade to the south in Yemen. But that gave Mecca its significance. 2 things: the Hajj, the pilgrimage to this house, this temple, that was built by Ibrahim ﷺ, and also used as a trade center for trade, where people used to come and trade and buy and sell their goods. He also talks about the difference between the settled versus the Bedouin Arabs. The Bedouin Arabs, rural Arabs, were hardy in terms of strength and their military prowess. They also had particular character traits, such as they were easily excitable, they were unreliable, compared to the settled Arabs. So now he's talking about the Arabs that established themselves around the Kaaba in Mecca, and he states that Qusay, who was the chief of Quraysh, built the first stone house around the Kaaba. And so the qualities and characteristics that they had, he refers to the Arabic term of hilm, gentleness, clemency, mildness, and forbearance. The chief of Quraysh was Abdul Muttalib, the grandfather of the Prophet ﷺ. He was also the custodian of the Kaaba, and he also looked after the pilgrimage, him and his clan and his tribe. But when he died, there was poetry written after his death that the shepherd had perished. Again, bringing in that concept of shepherd leadership, that Quraysh in Mecca were now left without a shepherd, and no one chief of Quraysh filled that particular position that he had, that Abdul Muttalib had. What had instead took its place was the Majlis of tribal elders. This Majlis was already in existence, but without a shepherd, without a chief of Quraysh, the Majlis then took on that responsibility of making the important decisions that needed to be made. John Adair argues that this perhaps worked in the favor of the Prophet ﷺ, the fact that Mecca did not have a chief. Guiding the Majlis is another important leadership skill. So he reflects on, he outlines what are some of the skills that if they were to be achieved, or in the case, and reflecting back and linking it to that of the leadership of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as a young man, there were particular skills that were required to influence or to guide the decision making of this Majlis. The first was positional authority. Now, obviously, as the chief or head of a tribe came with it this positional authority. The second was personal prestige, so the credibility and the standing of the person. And lastly, importantly, was the art of and skill of persuasion. Now, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as a young boy, sat in these gatherings, firstly with his grandfather and then with his uncle, and he took note about the how this Majlis operated and what was required, which skills were required to influence the decision making. And then Nelson Mandela, John Adair relates this to Nelson Mandela having a similar experience to that of a young Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where Nelson Mandela himself was taken by the tribe of his chief to sit in these similar types of gatherings where they made decisions, and Nelson reflected later on, saying that my later notions of leadership were profoundly influenced by observing the regent, referring to the chief and his court. So a very similar experience, and Nelson Mandela taking that experience and witnessing and recognizing what was required to guide people to make sound decisions, and in fact how to become a good leader. Then going on to the topic of this third chapter is about caravans and journey leadership. He mentions the trade caravans that took place from Mecca firstly to Syria in the north and Yemen to the south, and what was required for these trade caravans. And we know that Mecca was barren. It didn't have anything to trade with, so goods had to be brought from outside in order to be sold. So that is why Meccans went to Syria and to Yemen to buy goods and then bring it back and then sell it there. And traders, instead of traders from Yemen going all the way to Syria, they could meet in Mecca, midway between the two, or in between the two cities, and then use Mecca as a trading post. And that's how Mecca became significant as a trading point. He uses the Arabic word qa'id as a guide, a leader, a commander. And the qa'id is the caravan leader, and that's where the term qiyada comes from, leadership. In the Anglo-Saxon terminology, the word that is being used is la'id or laden, to go or to travel. And that's where leadership then is a journey concept, taking people from point A to point B. So that's where this metaphor or this concept of a journey as part of the function of leadership, which is a very important concept to understand for leaders, that it's not just managing the status quo, but it is taking people on a journey from point A to point B, achieving a particular goal and objective. And he also then says, perhaps as a caravan leader, because Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam had an opportunity to be employed as such by Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha. And he says, perhaps as a caravan leader, Muhammad discovered that he had a natural gift for leadership. And then he contrasts it to those people who may be given the position of leadership but cannot lead. And this was mentioned about Gaius Antonius, a Roman leader, was a man with no aptitude for leadership. And then also the African proverb, a log of wood may be in the river for years, but it never becomes a crocodile. And then John Adair outlines what are some of the characteristics or qualities and skills that a caravan leader needs to have, firstly, before the caravan departs from the city of Mecca, needs to hire the camel drivers, needs to assemble and prepare the loads, get all the camels that are required for the journey, make sure that enough provisions are taken with them for the journey, so length of time, amount of provisions, number of people needed to be calculated and provided for. They also needed to take the necessary security measures with them on the journey so as not to be hijacked. And then, and finally, also wages that these people need to be paid. The camel drivers, the people that were providing security or provisions and so forth. So it was an enormous enterprise, being the leader of a caravan. And then the Prophet ﷺ traveled from Mecca to Syria on a number of occasions. And these were the skills that he needed to have in order to be a good caravan leader. And then also the caravan leader, accountability rests solely with the caravan leader for the entire wealth of that particular trip, that journey. There was no insurance at the time. The only backing that a caravan leader had, and in the case of the Prophet ﷺ, was his tribe would then have to step in and provide the recompense for any losses suffered during that expedition. The fact that the Qa'id or the caravan leader had nobility added to the security, and because the Prophet ﷺ came from a noble family, noble lineage, from his grandfather and his father, that added to the security of the caravan, and also then prevented robbers or tyrants along the way to try and hijack whatever, or cause them any particular trouble along their journey. And then he refers to the Greek Byzantines called a caravan leader a synodiac, a chief, a ruler, or a leader, where they had a similar concept, and that's probably where the concept of leadership came from, part of these trade practices, because it was a particular and a very specific enterprise or expedition that required a number of important skills of leadership. And then finally, he ends off this chapter 3 with the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, linking it again to leadership, collected in the book of Ibn Majah rahmatullahi alayhi. On a journey, the leader of a group is their servant. And we've covered this before, Sayyid al-Qawm khadimuhum, which is a similar hadith with a different wording, that a master of a people is their servant. In this particular narration of the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ links it to a journey. So being a caravan leader or any particular journey, the leader of a group is their servant. So in summary, the key points that he makes about the leadership of the Prophet ﷺ in reference to being a caravan leader, Muhammad ﷺ learned muruwa from his grandfather. So he introduces this Arabic term muruwa, which is what it means to be a man. And so what are the qualities required to be classified as a man, to be a real man, to be brave, to be courageous, to be wise, to be honorable, and to have generosity. And a caravan leader, you see this practical wisdom being developed in terms of having visionary leadership, but not only visionary leadership. And as I mentioned before, one of the most important components of the definition of leadership is having vision. But also decision-making, because decision-making is important. It's an important skill, and wisdom is required for good decision-making. The caravan leader also, it is learned through aptitude, practice, and reflection, the three important steps that are required for these skills to be developed. Aptitude meaning an attitude of wanting to learn, of wanting to develop the skills, but in practicing it, and in that practice and failure and refinement and mastery, there also needs to be the third component of reflection. That's how we really master anything that we are in pursuit of. Without that reflection, it's hard, it's difficult to achieve mastery. And then he repeats again the qa'id, the leadership skills that are required of a caravan leader. And finally, the last hadith that he mentioned was the important concept of servant leadership. And again, bringing it back to the caravan, the trade caravan, that the leader of that needs to make sure that everybody is taken well care of on that particular journey, because if people's needs are not being met, then that could jeopardize the integrity and the safety and the quality, I guess, of the caravan, of the trade journey that is being undertaken. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshallah, to help us appreciate some of these important points and some insights that we are gaining via the insights of John Adair in his book about the leadership of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and try, inshallah, if we can, just reflecting on these key points. Firstly, one important point that he refers to here: what does it mean to be a man and a woman? to be brave, wise, honorable, generous. Those are important qualities and characteristics that we see in our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then also that second point there under practical wisdom of aptitude, practice, and reflection. Those are the three important steps that if we follow that, inshallah, we can develop important skills and also master them.